continuing on with this testimony that I just give, Brother Gary mentioned to me to another testimony that he thought I should give. I had told some of the brethren about the Lord doing these kind of things, and they didn't seem to be too interested about it. And but a friend of mine had come here and was talking to me, and his name was Brother Lovell Harper. And he was a black brother. He used to be my brother for a long time. And I'd preached with him at different places. And so he was pretty hung up that you couldn't have no prophecy or nothing out in the audience. And so therefore, I knew Brother Branham had made tapes on about putting it in the back room. But Brother Branham goes ahead and tells why he put it in the back room, because he said on 1964 that when he made a certain tape, and he said, and brought the church to a certain order, was to see if I could get the manifestations of the gifts, because half of it wasn't coming to pass, and it got where you couldn't hardly preach. And I'd been to Jeffersonville many, many times, and people and other meetings where they get up and begin to try to give tongues or interpretation, and while a man was preaching, and Brother Branham, he'd be preaching, and they'd break in on the altar calls and all that kind of things. So the Bible teaches that these gifts should be judged, and we can't just have gifts flying around. And most of the time that he was speaking to me, we was in a prayer meeting, maybe at the house, or sitting around the table or in the front room, and we'd all get to pray, and that's when the Lord was speaking. But a lot of brethren thought I was really out of order because that I let it speak. And in the audience, after the preaching was over, and if it took a notion to speak. And I don't believe you can lock God up in no back room, because even the scripture tells, if there come amongst you an unbeliever or unlearned, and everybody speaking tongues and no interpretation, won't they say you're mad? But if they all prophesy and reveal the secret of the heart, and then they'll fall down and report that God's in you of the truth. Well, I don't believe that you'd be having unbelievers and unlearned coming in back room. But we, a lot of times, pray in the back room before the services, and he'd tell me things that's going to happen in the service and things that was taking place. But anyway, Brother Lovell Harper, I testified to him a good bit about these things, and I talked to different brethren about it. But most of the time they wasn't interested in it, in what I was telling them, most of them that I talked to. But anyway, it didn't make any difference. God still works and still kept working. Well, Brother Lovell, he went to the meeting up there in, he went with me even out to Colorado and some of the places. But anyway, he was having a meeting down there at his church, and I went down there to preach for him, and he had asked me to come down and preach for him, and we went down there, and the Spirit had spoke to me and told me to watch for 6 doves, and said it'd be a sign to me, 6 doves. Well, I tried to watch for 6 doves together, and I'd see doves sometimes sitting on the highline wires, but then I never had counted 6 doves together. Well, when Brother Lovell asked me to come down and preach for me, he drove me over there to Brother Jose's house. And Brother Jose, they didn't have a church building, so Brother Jose just tore his house apart and tore a whole partition out of it. He had a nice place. And he tore the whole partition out, and when he did, he made a place for to have church in there. Well, they took me over and showed me where it was. And when we drove up there, there's 3 or 4 of us in the vehicle. They said, "Look there, there's 6 doves on top. Look at them doves up on top of that house." And I counted them, And there were 6 doves up there, and these doves was not sitting. They was walking around up on top of this building, just backwards and all over. And I told them right then, I said, I believe this is a sign that the Lord spoke to me about. I see 6 doves. And I said, you watch now. If it is, I said, we're going to have some supernatural things taking place. Well, they'd had it real dry, and it had been humidity real bad, no rain. And I told him, I said, the breeze had picked up, and it rained and cooled everything down. And I told him also, I said, you watch the wind, because the Lord had spoke to me about the wind, and told me to. Brother Joe Shrewsbury had told me the Lord had told him years ago that in the end time the wind would blow. And he said, I would never tell nobody that, because he said the wind blows all the time, different times. But God began to reveal to me about the wind blowing at a certain time. And I've had him to tell us that when the wind started blowing. And even one time I went with the tent to Baton Rouge, and they was talking about how it was real hot and humid. And so the Spirit spoke to me and told me these words, said, now you watch when you get down there, and it'll be real humid, it'll be real still. And it said, but when you put the tent up, said that when you put the tent up, it will ripple. And then the next night it'll ripple more. And then it will finally get to blowing. It will finally get to moving until you'll hear it snap like a whip. Well, we seen that fulfilled. We got down there and it was real still, and everything was just real humid and hot. And we was in Baton Rouge down there, Denham Springs. And when we found a place to put the tent, we had put it on the same street that Brother Brown had been there in a mile of that place. And the Lord foretold before I ever went down there, he told me to get a hold of a man that would live down there. I'd heard of a man by the name of McMasters, Shorty McMasters, and I didn't know where I knew of him at, but when I was at Corning, and I went over there, and Brother McMasters had me to speak there, and he asked me if I ever knew some McMasters, and I said no, and he said, well, they used to call him Shorty. And I said, yeah, I've heard him, but I don't know where. So when I was praying about going to Baton Rouge, the Lord told me, said, you contact Shorty the man you call Shorty McMasters. Well, I called up Brother McMasters at Corning, Arkansas, and asked him about his uncle. And he said, well, he's fixing to preach a meeting up here. And he's from down in Louisiana. And come to find out, he was in 6 miles of where we put the tent up. And I went up there to Corning and seen him and told him that we wasn't asking for no donation, nothing, but if any of his people could come out and help us sing and so forth, we'd appreciate it. He said, well, we'll see. Well, then the Spirit spoke to me and told me, you watch when you go down there slap in the face and with him. And sure enough, we went over there and give him some flyers, and he wouldn't put them up, and he never did put them up, and he never did announce a meeting or anything. But we also went to another brother down there, and everybody knew him, and he announced the meeting and so forth and so on, Jimmy Swaggart. And he told the brother Curtis and them, said, you coming down here to build a church? He said, no, we're just coming down here to have a meeting. He said, well, I don't know if I can come or not, but you tell your preacher that we welcome him, and we'll have the prayer people that's praying back here to be praying for y'all's meeting, and we'll put it on the bulletin board. And he did do that. But anyway, the Lord had let me know that was going to take place down there. And though they didn't think it was nothing happening here, when we got down there, the wind done just exactly. It began to ripple when I first went on the tent. Then next night it was blowing a little more. The next night a little more. And one night I got telling about it because it was just blowing and the tent was just rolling backwards and forwards with the wind. And about that time, the wind caught the flap on the tent and it snapped just like a whip, just like the Spirit of the Lord had said it'd do. So I told Brother Lovell and them this testimony, and I said, you watch the wind. And the wind would move and come. When we'd get to talking about the Lord and different things, here would come that breeze. Another thing the Spirit told me about the wind, it told me to watch when I buried people that was Christians, that the wind would blow at that time. And we've seen it over and over when there wasn't any wind that looked like real still. And when we'd start to put the body into the ground and we prayed that the wind would come, and sometime at that time so strong that it would about blow the flowers off of the casket. These things I can prove by infallible proof, by testimony of people right now that's still alive. See, so therefore these things are true. So I told Brother Lovell about it, and so while we were there, Brother Lovell's sister, Sister Janoi, and she had been down real bad shape for about, I think she told me 10, 12 years, and she got so bad that she went down the basement. She had to crawl out, and she had to have a walker or a wheelchair, and that's the condition she had been in. But she knew Brother Lovell was having this meeting, and her daughter and her flew down there, and they had to help her to walk. And so we was down there at that service, and they had asked her to come up and sing. And they got her up there and had to help her, and she was singing, and then they had to help her sit down. She about fell out. And don't you know that while we were there, I'm preaching the gospel, and Lovell's, I was telling about Brother Branham, the time that I seen him pray for a person. And this person I was in Chicago, and it was way back there in 55 or 56, and he was at the Philadelphia church, Brother Bose, and Brother Branham brought somebody up there, and this person hadn't heard out of their ear ever, and is deaf and dumb. And Brother Branham prayed for the person and snapped his finger, and they started hearing, and then they started talking. And first time in 37 years. And so I was giving that testimony, and I raised my hand up and kind of pointed at my ear, and when it did, something happened to her ear, and she heard something in her ear, and the Lord healed her right then. And she had been 12 years in this condition, and the Lord healed her right at that time. Now you can get a hold of her, and she'll verify that this is true. And she went with me and Brother Lovell, and we went, she come to Jeffersonville, and we preached up there at Don Ruddle's church, and have a few nights meeting there. And then she went with us on up into Boston, and she went up there singing and so forth. So these testimonies are true, and we can prove these things. And the Bible said, prove all things, and then hold fast to what is good. And I remember Brother Branham in his books and so forth, when the Lord started doing these things, he said, now here's people's names and addresses if you want to contact them. And you know, brings my mind back to Georgie Carter, that Brother Branham prayed for. And everybody that's read his books knows the testimony. And you know, I was privileged one time, Brother Roy Borders taking me and to eat with her, and went out and bought her dinner. And I got a chance to meet her and see she's a real healthy lady. So God bless you until another time.